proposing This is the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation simulation. Today is October 27, 2024. We are having a simulation with Nizar Farsakh, who is a Palestinian negotiator. We are proposing a federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine that would be elected by the people of Israel and Palestine in the area of Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel, over 14 million people. The federal government will be separate and independent of the Israeli and the Palestinian governments. It will exist whether or not the Israeli or the Palestinian government approve of it, and it will exist whether or not the Palestinian or the Israeli government themselves exist. The federal government that we are proposing would not stand on the shoulder of the Israeli or the Palestinian government. It would be a federal government independent and separate of the Israeli and the Palestinian government, and it will stand on its own legs, and it will have its own legitimacy. The legitimacy will be derived from elections that will take place online and will allow the 14 million people to vote in Israel and Palestine for 300 parliament members representing 300 districts and a president and vice president, one Palestinian and one Israeli. President Abraham Lincoln said, a government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish. And we are proposing a federal government by the people, and the people are the Palestinian and the Israeli people, of the people, Palestinian and Israeli people, for the people, Palestinian and Israeli together, that will not perish, that will be a legitimate government based on democracy, based on elections, based on separation of power, internal separation of power, with a legislative body, executive body, and a judicial body, all of them independent of each other, and the entire federal government independent of the Israeli and the Palestinian government, all based on elections, fairness, and based on a constitution. The constitution is available for everyone to read in 3 languages. You can go to our website, ipconfederation.org, and read the constitution in whatever of the 3 languages, either Arabic, Hebrew, or English. The Constitution explains how the federal government will be created, how the 3 branches will be created, and what will be the function of the 3 branches. Constitution also explains the relationship between the Israeli and the federal government and the Palestinian and the government and the federal government. We're not calling for the dismantlement of the Israeli or the Palestinian government. We are calling for cooperation, when necessary, with the Israeli and the Palestinian government. My name is Joseph Avasar. You can reach me at josephavassar@gmail.com. Today's guest is Nizar Farsakh. Nizar is a Palestinian-American political analyst with extensive experience in the Israel-Palestine conflict. He advised the last 2 Palestinian ambassadors to Washington from 2011 to 2017, and he was a member of the Palestinian negotiating team and advised the Palestinian President Abbas, Prime Minister Dr. Fayyad, and several ministers. He worked on the Gaza evacuation talks in 2005 as well as the Annapolis peace process in 2007. Nizar is currently a lecturer of international affairs at George Washington University, where he teaches a graduate negotiating skills course. He is also on the board of the Museum of the Palestinian People in DC. I met with Nizar on Zoom, just like I do normally with our previous guest. He chose either 3 or 4 legislation that he wants to discuss in this simulation, and that's what we are going to do. Our next guest is Dr. Avner Dinor. He is a secular theologian, a lecturer of Jewish studies at Sapir College in Israel and at Bar-Ilan University. On November 24, we will have Rami Aman. He is a Palestinian journalist and a peace activist in the Gaza Strip. On December 8, we will have the former Minister of Finance of Greece, Yanis Varoufakis, who is a very articulate, and I'm not sure I want to use that word articulate, because everyone is articulate. All our guests are articulate, but he speaks a lot about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I'm sure, is fascinated by our formula for peace for a federal government.
Joseph Varoufakis, this is how you say it.
Say that again?
Varoufakis.
Okay,
Varoufakis. Thanks.
Okay. On December 22nd, we will have David Veto, who is a professor at Alabama University. We are demonstrating in this simulation, this is a simulation, it's not a lecture. We are demonstrating how a federal government will function in conjunction with the Israeli and the Palestinian government, while giving them a veto power relating to legislation that violates their sovereignty. And that's what we are actually doing in this simulation. We are asking you to respect the simulation and to write your comments in the chat. Nasir is the administrator of the comments and the questions. His job is to relay to us all the questions, and it also to convert your comments to a question in order to facilitate a better understanding of what we are doing. For example, if you write a comment such as, Israel will never agree to that, Nasir's job is to translate that to, or interpret that into a question. And he will ask the question, will the government of Israel allow that? So please put your questions and your comments in the chat, and Nasir will convey them to us. Nasir, are you here? Can you say hi?
Hello, Joseph, and hello, everybody.
Thank you, Nasir. All right. This is a short video that explains how this federal...
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has endured for generations. And instead of time healing the wounds, it's only caused the anger to fester and the violence to grow. But what if there was a way to alleviate the tension? Something that may not outright solve every problem, but at least create a forum that encourages a peaceful compromise. Welcome to the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, a common third government between the Israeli and Palestinian citizens, specifically designed to foster peace, tolerance, and economic prosperity between the two nations. Here's how it works. First off, both Israel and Palestine will keep their respective governments. Israel's Knesset and the Palestinian National Authority will remain unchanged. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, IPC, will be a third entity acting as a unifying agent between the two. The IPC will comprise 300 parliament members elected from 300 districts in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Above them will preside a president and vice president, one Israeli and one Palestinian. In order for the IPC to pass a law, it will require a 55% majority from its Israeli representatives, as well as a 55% majority from its Palestinian representatives, thereby preventing either side from monopolizing the legislature. Of course, the IPC won't undermine the political power of either the Israeli or the Palestinian government. At any time, Israel or Palestine may veto a law passed by the IPC. If neither side vetoes, the law is passed. And the two nations are another step closer to resolution. Please help us make this a reality. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. We might speak different languages, but we all mean the same thing.
I just want to emphasize again, if you have questions, please ask the questions. Please use the chat to and type your question, or raise your hand, and Nizar will get to you and ask you to ask the question. We encourage questions. Before we go on with the simulation, let's do a survey, and we will compare this survey to what we're doing now to another survey that we will conduct at the end of the simulation. Do you support a federal government for the people of Israel and Palestine? So that we are, myself and Dan, and I think Nizar we cannot vote. Please publish the vote. 23 out of 23 voted yes. We have 40 people in this Zoom. That means that 17 people did not vote. I understand some of you cannot vote because you're using a device that does not give you the option to vote, and some are reluctant to vote. That's fine. We will do another survey at the end of the simulation. Okay. So 23 out of 23 voted yes. The reason we have such a high yes vote is a lot have to do with many of the people who participate in this simulation today have participated before and understand how it works, and therefore support it. All right. Sorry. We defined a confederation and a federal government in the same way. Confederation and federal governments exist worldwide to address specific conflicts. Some governments refer to themselves as a federal government, while others refer to them as a confederation, to themselves as confederation. Definitions are not fixed and evolve with changing realities. In the context of Israel-Palestine, the IPC defines confederation as a shared government for the people of Israel and Palestine, guided by democratic principles outlined in the IPC Constitution, which can be found at ipconfederation.org. That's the website I showed you at the beginning. This is the heart of the simulation. You will have to make some assumptions in order for the simulations to go on. And these are the assumptions. The first assumption is that we were able to obtain major funding in order to promote the idea of a federal government in Israel and Palestine, to explain to the people of Israel and Palestine the benefits of having a federal government, and quite frankly, also to demonstrate to them the failure of their governments in the most important part, which is giving them peace. So you'll have to assume that we were able to secure major funding to do that for a 1-year-long campaign, and that we were also able to create a platform for people to recruit people to run for parliament and to run for president and vice president in 300 districts in Israel and Palestine, and to run for president and vice president for the nationwide area of Israel-Palestine. That's the first assumptions you will have to make in this simulation. The second assumption, and by the way, you will be able to comment on these assumptions and also ask questions about whether these assumptions are achievable. And then we will ask for Nizar if those assumptions are achievable. The second assumption is that we gave 14 million people the right to vote. 14 million people with the exclusion of children in the area of Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel. 14 million adults, meaning over the age of 18. You will also have to assume that 5 million people actually voted. That 3 million Palestinian voted and 2 million Israeli voted. You will also have to assume that the president of the whole area received 1.5 million votes. For purposes of these simulations, you will have to assume that me, Joseph, was elected as president. It makes it easier for me to conduct this simulation if I am acting in the capacity of the president. So that it's clear, I will never run for president. I am not even qualified under the Constitution because I am a citizen of Israel, but I'm not a resident of Israel, and therefore I am not qualified under the Constitution. But for the purpose of this simulation, please assume that I was elected, and I will act from now on as if I am the president. You will also have to assume that 300 parliament members were elected in 300 districts. That's in 300 districts in the entire area of Gaza, Israel, and the West Bank combined. Each district encompasses 47,000 people. One parliament member for 47,000 people. And I will ask you, the audience, to take part in this simulation by assuming that you have been elected to the parliament as either Israelis or Palestinians. Before I go to Nizar, I would like to ask you, the audience, to ask questions regarding these assumptions. Do you have any questions regarding these assumptions?
Joseph, there's a question. Could you clarify president and vice president, like how the vice president is chosen just a little bit more? Because someone had a question regarding that.
Okay, whoever gets the greatest number of votes for president becomes president.
Mhm.
Whoever gets the second number of votes of the other nationality become vice president. So in this simulation, you'll have to assume that the Israeli me received 1.5 million votes. But even if another Israeli received 1.4 million votes, he or she will not be vice president. The person, the Palestinian person who received the most votes as Palestinians will be vice president. So, and we will rotate in 2 years. I hope it clarifies. Any other questions? Okay, hearing no questions, gonna go to Nizar. Nizar, do you have any comments or questions regarding these assumptions?
Nizar, can you unmute?
Sorry. No, I'm good with assumptions.
Okay, do you believe that these assumptions are achievable if we are able to secure major funding to maintain or to meet the first assumption, which is for a year-long campaign to recruit Palestinians to run and to have an election. Are these assumptions achievable in your opinion?
I believe so, yeah.
All right, thank you. All right, so I'm going to be asking you to choose. You, I mean the audience. I'm asking you, the audience, to choose your nationality. You are now, I'm asking you to become parliament member in one of these areas that are shown in the map, which is Israel, Palestine. I'm asking you to choose your nationality as a parliament member, and you'll have to remember that your district may be 100% of your nationality, or maybe a mixed district. So at this point, please make your choice whether you are Israeli or Palestinian parliament member in this simulation. I'm gonna give you another 15 seconds to make your choice, whether you are a Palestinian parliament member or Israeli parliament member. And please maintain your designation throughout the simulation. Continue to be that parliament member and remain intellectually honest throughout the simulation. And I may ask you in the simulation, what area do you represent? What specific area do you represent? What city, what village do you represent? Is your district a Palestinian district? Is your district Israeli district? Are you elected in a mixed district? So just keep that in mind when you are making your decision at this time. Could you please publish so we have 15 Palestinian parliament members, and we have 12 Israeli parliament members. So please remain in that capacity because you will be asked to vote. Now, I also asked for volunteers to be Israeli Prime Minister. Do we have the Israeli Prime Minister? The Israeli Prime Minister. Giacomo, are you here?
If you want, I can do it.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, so Giacomo, you'll be Israeli Prime Minister. And Nasir, can you be the Palestinian president?
Sure.
All right. So we are doing this in order to demonstrate how this federal government will work in conjunction with the Israeli and the Palestinian government. Now, Giacomo and Nasir are not part of our government. I am the president. You are the audience. You are the parliament members. I am not allowed to vote because I'm not part of the legislative branch. I am the president. I'm part of the executive branch. You, the parliament members, you can vote because you are part of the legislative branch. Nasir is the president of Palestine. It's a different government. He cannot vote. And Giacomo is also the president of the prime minister of Israel. It's a different government. He cannot vote. So let's go on to the first order of business, and that is to ratify the Constitution. This is a short version of the Constitution. Charles, are you here? Can you read the short version of the Constitution? I guess he's not here. Libby, are you here?
I am.
Could you please read the short version of the Constitution?
All right. We believe that Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to equal rights under the law and guaranteed human rights and freedom. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation does not intend to supersede or supplant the Palestinian or Israeli governments, nor to abrogate or undermine any agreements between those governments. We recognize the need to work with the Israeli and Palestinian governments. Our purpose is to resolve conflicts and to expand the relationship between Palestinians and Israelis in a fair and equitable manner. We believe in equal rights under the law, guaranteed human rights, and freedom for all. We voluntarily give the legislature and the governments of Israel and Palestine veto power over legislation we pass relating to the domain of control of those governments. We believe in the separation of power between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. We believe in the creation of a permanent secular government for all the people residing in Israel and Palestine. We believe in having a separate judicial branch relating to IPC legislation with Israeli and Palestinian judges, with a system to avoid biased decisions based on nationality.
So the important part of this legislation is that we do not intend to undermine the Israeli or the Palestinian government. Whatever agreements they reach between themselves, such as an agreement to create a two-state solution or to create borders or one state, whatever they agree between themselves, constitutionally, we are prohibited from undermining those agreements, and we are constitutionally prohibited from undermining the Palestinian or the Israeli government. We are also constitutionally required to give a veto power to the Palestinian and the Israeli governments on issues in which our legislation violates their sovereignty. And we will deal with that later. What does it mean? What does it mean, the veto power? Does anyone, before we go to Nizar, do you have any questions regarding the Constitution? Do you have any questions? Nasir, are there any questions?
For the Constitution, no.
Okay. All right, then let's go to Nizar and ask you to make your comments or to ask your questions regarding the Constitution.
I don't have questions. I just wanted to reiterate that the idea is while you'll have, we're assuming that there are functioning Palestinian and Israeli governments, and this third parliament is one that's going to work to see what things we can do together, and then bring it back to the governments to adopt. If they don't like it, they can veto, right? So I think it's a good way to show that there are things that Palestinians and Israelis can agree on, and makes with the fact that they are, each person is representing 47,000 people, some of whom are going to be mixed Palestinian and Israeli. It's going to make them have to be responsive to their constituents.
Nizar, your assumption is wrong. We are not assuming the existence of the Israeli or the Palestinian government. We are an independent, separate government that would deal with the Israeli and the Palestinian governments if they exist. If they do not exist, we don't have to give them a veto power. We are not standing on the shoulders of the Israeli or the Palestinian government. We are standing on our own legs.
Yeah, but if they are not there, then we will be, our executive would be implementing the laws.
Yes, if they are there, we give them a veto power, if it violates their sovereignty. If they're not there, then we don't have to give them a veto power because they have no sovereignty.
Yeah, but somebody needs to have sovereignty. That's my point. But it's fine. Okay, yeah.
All right. No, okay. Let's ratify the Constitution. Before we actually ratify the Constitution, you have to understand that you have been elected, and you'll have to assume, Parliament members, that you have been elected. You told your constituents that you accept the Constitution and you want to create a federal government. So you will have to ratify the Constitution. Should you refuse to ratify the Constitution, you will be expelled from the government, and whoever gets the second number of votes in your district will become Parliament member. Palestinian Parliament members, please ratify the Constitution.
Just so you know that when the vote comes up, it comes up for everybody. So when it's time for Palestinians to vote, only Palestinians vote. And when it's time for Israelis to vote, only Israeli votes. Just X out if it's not your turn to vote.
Exactly. All right, publish the vote. 100% of the Palestinian Parliament members voted in favor of this to ratify the Constitution. Let's go to the Israeli Parliament members. Please vote. Israeli Parliament members, please vote. Publish the votes. Also, 100% of the Israeli Parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. And anytime you have questions or comments, put them in the chat, and Nasir will convey those questions or translate your comments into a question. All right. So congratulations. This is a momentous occasion in the history of humanity, not in the recent history, but in the history of humanity. It has never been done before that the people of Israel and Palestine, or the people who reside there, whatever you call them, have been able to pass a constitution accepted to the people of Israel and Palestine, who chose their parliament members and ratified by the parliament members. It has never been done in the history of humanity, and therefore it's a momentous occasion in the history of the world. This Constitution undermines the existing governments, meaning the Israeli and the Palestinian governments' use of fear and hate to justify their actions. We are now a federal government, Palestinians and Israelis together. It removes the collective stigma against Israelis and Palestinians. The stigma is that we are born and live to fight each other. This Constitution proves that that stigma is an ugly, stereotypical idea, and the Constitution removes that stigma. It provides huge political capital to the president and the parliament and to the entire nation of Israel-Palestine. As the president, I intend to use that political capital all over the world. It compels the governments of the world and organization to contribute, because they will not be able to deny the benefit of a federal government that passed its own legislation, its own constitution in Israel, Palestine, and it gives the Israelis and the Palestinians new positive self-image. First order of business after we pass the Constitution is granting a veto power to the separate government. Libby, could you please read that legislation?
The Confederation is the government of the entire population of Israel and Palestine from the river to the sea. We recognize the Palestinian and Israeli governments and are seeking their cooperation to implement our vision for peace by giving them a veto. We will do our utmost to satisfy the essential needs of each government. We are pleading with the Palestinian and Israeli public to understand that while we would like to pass the best legislation possible to improve their lives, under these constraints, a perfect legislation is not possible. We hereby bestow a veto power relating to legislation affecting sovereignty to the following: the government of Israel on issues in which it is indispensable, the Palestinian government on issues in which it is indispensable. In the event of changes in the entirety of the Israeli or Palestinian governments, this legislation may be amended or repealed subject to the IPC Constitution. The Parliament will decide on indispensability. Vetoes may be bestowed individually or collectively.
So we are the federal government. We decide who to give a veto power to and under what conditions. So if the government are indispensable, whether it's the Palestinian or the Israeli government, if they are indispensable, we give them a veto power. But if they are dispensable, then we do not give them a veto power. Examples: if we pass legislation regarding the use of land, we cannot implement that legislation unless we give them a veto power, and therefore we give them a veto power. If we pass legislation regarding police force, we give them a veto power because we cannot implement that legislation unless they have a veto power, or the removal of the wall. However, if we want to pass legislation relating to the IPC budget, to our own budget, then they are dispensable. It's none of their business. We can pass this legislation whether or not they agree to it. We can ratify the Constitution whether or not the Israeli or the Palestinian government agree to it. Therefore, they are dispensable and they are not giving a veto power. So the same for appointing ministers. If we want to appoint a minister of justice or foreign minister or whatever, that's our business. It's not the Palestinian or the Israeli government's business, and we can do it whether or not they agree to it, and therefore they are dispensable and they're not given a veto power. Now, I'm missing one slide here, but I remember it by heart. The reason we give them a veto power is because when we give them a veto power, we get support from the people of Israel and Palestine, because the people of Israel and Palestine, they trust their government and they do not want to dismantle their governments. So we are giving them a safety net, and we are telling the people of Israel and Palestine, your governments that you trust will remain intact. Your military will remain intact. But if we pass legislation that violates your government's sovereignty, then they have a veto power. In addition, the veto power protects the people who are running for the parliament or for president, because we will not be called a subversive organization. When we give a veto power to the government of Israel and Palestine, we are recognizing and we are declaring that we are not there to undermine those governments, and therefore we cannot be called a subversive organization that's trying to destroy other governments, and therefore we will get protection, legal protection, by having this veto power. All right, let's go to the first order of business, legislation relating to the existing reality, and that's rebuilding Gaza and Southern Israel. Libby, could you please read this legislation?
The IPC is the only legitimate government in Israel and Palestine, consisting of 300 parliament members elected by the entire population. Approximately 125 members represent the destroyed areas. The IPC is committed to the well-being of all people, including the 5 million individuals directly affected by the violence since October 7th. The IPC believes that the future of the Gaza and Israeli people is interconnected. It is unlikely that the Israeli and Palestinian governments will be able to restore a normal, peaceful existence in the foreseeable future. The IPC is requesting $50 billion grant from the international community, which includes Israel and Palestine, to fund and coordinate the rebuilding of the devastated areas. The IPC will prioritize the following. The IPC is calling for an immediate ceasefire and the immediate return of all political prisoners in Israel and Palestine to their homes, rebuilding thousands of homes, roads, hospitals, civic buildings, and infrastructure to facilitate the immediate return of all people to their homes, restoring law and order and civil society that have been destroyed. The government of Israel and Palestine are given a veto power.
And the reason they are given a veto power is because they are indispensable. We have to have them in order to pass and in order to implement the legislation. Does anyone have any questions regarding this legislation? Remember,
There's no
we
questions
have
in the chat.
huge capital, huge political capital when we pass the Constitution, when we have 300 parliament members, when we have 5 million people voting. And as the president, I'm now seeking to use that capital power, that political power, in order to obtain funding worldwide to rebuild the area of Gaza and Southern Israel. Nasir, did you say there is a question?
No, Joseph, there is no questions.
Okay. So first we'll do the voting, and then we'll go to Nizar to ask for his comments or question. Palestinian parliament members, please vote. Palestinian only. Do you agree with this legislation? Do you support this legislation? Palestinian parliament members. Okay, publish the votes. We need 55% of the Palestinian parliament members to agree. We got 100% of the Palestinian parliament members to vote yes on this legislation. Remember, we are trying to show how to thread the needle. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Please, Israeli parliament members, please vote on this legislation. We need 55% of the Israeli parliament members. Please, okay. Please publish the votes. We got 86% of the Israeli parliament members. One parliament member voted no. Even though I can ignore that parliament member who voted no, I am just curious to see, could you please identify yourself and the person who voted no?
Hi, it's Don Raphael, Parliament member from Jaffa. I voted no, Joseph, because I feel given the extremist nature, particularly of the military in the Israeli side, I don't see who's going to conduct the civil law and order in such an environment. So it seems, as somebody mentioned in the chat, it seems like a legislation that won't have any impact on the real lives of people there. I think there needs more work.
So you believe that if we're able to obtain $50 billion and we will not be able to leverage that amount in order to improve the life of the Palestinians and the Israeli people before we spend it?
I think attaining $50 billion would be a wonderful thing, but who's going to implement it, given the veto power? And I'm just trying to be realistic, and I think there needs to be more guardrails as to how it's implemented. I'm not against the grant. I think it's a good thing, but given the environment and the situation, I don't see how it could possibly be implemented without more work on the part of the legislation.
So what else would you want the legislation to?
I think there needs to be guidelines as to who's going to governance and what the utilization of the police and military on both sides, I should say. I would add Hamas to that and the leadership of the Palestinian side, but certainly on the Israeli side, there's no guardrails. I don't see how this could get implemented. I think there needs to be more clarity. I understand. I have issues with the veto, frankly, but in general. But in this situation, I think there needs to be clarity as to who's going to conduct the civil society with this type of grant and work. Not against it,
Well, you voted against it.
because I think there needs to be more work done to it.
Okay,
To outline.
but
If there's going to be a veto, anything you do on police or enforcement, the IDF and the Israelis will veto, will not adhere to.
So from what I understand, you are in agreement with the
Yeah.
intent behind this legislation. You just want more details.
Correct.
Well, we're not, this is a simulation. We are not, we don't have like a committee, and we, usually when legislation passes, it takes hours and hours to work all the minute details. We are asking you to look at the big picture, not to, what you're forcing us to do is to come with a perfect legislation within 10, 15 minutes of work. That's not a possibility, Don.
No, I understand that. So I'm just using this vote no as a point of this discussion, and I understand in reality, if this was not a simulation, a lot more work would go into it. But I am trying to also bring up the fact of I understand the concept of the veto power, but I'm using this as an example of why I think it's so tenuous. Because in a situation like this, if there isn't guardrails, then, I think it's not going to be helpful. And I think that's more important than the money. So I understand this is a simulation. So in that sense, I'm just giving you my feedback.
But we didn't get to the veto power yet.
Right.
All right, let's go to
By the way, I want to say hello to Nizar, who I worked with as a board member of the American Friends of Combatants for Peace in past years, and have great respect for him. So hello, Nizar. Good to see you here.
Likewise.
All right, let's go to the President of Palestine. Mr. President, are you going to veto this legislation?
I'm not going to veto it, but because our people right now are in desperate need, our infrastructure, our societies, everything has been destroyed, lives. The only thing is, I wanted to add, but it was removed, is that we have to have the ability to relocate our people to other parts of Palestine while the infrastructure is being built. In Israel right now, people living in the south are able to live in Tel Aviv and tell those communities. We have people in the north of Lebanon, the border with Lebanon, they're able to relocate. Israel is proposing many times for us to temporarily move to Egypt. So we either want to bring them here to the West Bank where we can take care of our people, or to other parts of Israel near Gaza. And this should have been added because it leaves us in these devastated areas to deal with the damages caused by this unjust war.
So, Mr. President, I suggest you submit a legislation for us.
It was submitted, but you guys removed it because the Israeli prime minister didn't want to approve it.
Right.
It was submitted.
You are the president of Palestine.
We have 50,000 students that cannot attend school right now. So what are they going to do until their universities are built up? Those laboratories and all those other stuff. What are they supposed to do in the meantime? Wait for 5 years for these universities to be rebuilt? So
I don't have any difficulties, and I don't question what you're raising. What I am saying is that you're trying to harness other issues into this issue, and we want to be as specific as possible in order to have the legislation passed. But I thank you for not vetoing it. Let me go to the Israeli Prime Minister. Mr. Prime Minister, are you going to veto this legislation?
In its present form, I'm definitely going to veto it. You're talking about $50 billion that you are saying should go into Gaza, and I don't know what will happen with this money. Will Hamas take that money and start building new tunnels? This is unacceptable to us. So, and then the second thing that I completely cannot accept is that the IPC is calling for an immediate ceasefire. You are taking sides, while the security of Israel is not being taken into account. I am a right-wing prime minister. I believe that we need to completely eradicate Hamas and the terrorists, and that is my prime objective. So I veto this. I would consider changing my mind, however, if the 50 billion passed received and managed by the Israeli government, by us, and allocated as by listening to what the IPC is calling for, but we want to know where this money goes and make sure absolutely that it doesn't go into terrorist hands. And when it comes to the ceasefire, I would like the IPC to remove that requirement in this legislation.
Mr. Prime Minister, just a quick note.
Mr. Prime Minister, you misunderstood this legislation. It's not 50 billion given to Gaza. It is given to Southern Israel and Gaza. And you are absolutely right. We are taking side, and the side that we are taking is the side of our people, my people. My people are the people in Gaza, in Southern Israel. And I am taking side in favor of my people. And you want me to take side against my people, and my people deserve ceasefire. Now, we are willing to work with you on reasonable legislation, but we are not going to give the money to Hamas or to you, because quite frankly, both of you have not been able. You're the problem. You're not the solution. We are the solution. We're not going to use our political power, what we've been able to achieve, to funnel money to your government. Now, if you choose to not work with us, then I am the president. I will expose you to the people of Israel and to the international community that you are refusing to rebuild what you have been part of, the destruction. And I will see to it that your coalition will fall apart, and a new government that is willing to work with us will come instead of your government.
That's fine. You can try to do this. It is you are not working with us. You are then adopting an antagonistic position. And I am very happy to show the public opinion that you are equating us to Hamas and to the terrorists, to people who are genocidal, and therefore I am absolutely maintaining the veto.
All right, then we are going to try to collect the funds, and what we will do is we will not. You can block us, yes. However, we will use the collected funds, and we will put them in trust with the World Bank until you decide to remove the veto. And the veto, we are just calling for policies that favors your people. And every day that you will refuse to help the people of Israel and Palestine, which are our people, then your government will be weaker and weaker every day. And we'll wait until your government falls.
Okay, so then I have another idea. With this money, assuming that it's raised, you don't want us to control it. So
Correct. We don't want
Let
you to
me-
control it.
okay, let me say that if you do give this money for us to administer it and manage it, we will work with the Palestinian Authority and with you in a fair and open way to make sure that this money is used in a positive way, especially for Gaza. But we still want to be able to know for sure that this money will not be going into any terrorist endeavors. So if you can accept some way where we are in charge, but we consult in an honest and constructive manner with you and the Palestinian Authority, I would reconsider the veto, but we still have a problem with the ceasefire text.
Okay. I think that the audience here see how the process could work. Let's go to Nizar. Nizar, could we hear your comments or your questions regarding the legislation and the process you have seen on rebuilding Gaza and Southern Israel?
Yeah, I think we do need to consider what are ways in which we guarantee how the money is being used. I would also add that we can prioritize what we build first, what we fix. We can agree on that, but I think prioritizing will help get support. If we build the things that are more important to people first, then people will be more likely to support the fund. But as to what the Israeli president said, I think there are ways, and there have been in the past, in which there is an audit and there is there is monitoring to how the money is spent. It's not that difficult to do, and I think the Palestinian leadership would not mind that, so long as that we agree that we're going to be building, and there is no veto power for Israel to just say no, you cannot have these plastic pipes, because we've had that before, where there were agricultural pipes, plastic pipes that were needed for agriculture, for irrigation, and the Israeli authorities stopped them. We had to involve Condoleezza Rice personally to to let them through, right? So there needs to be an agreement that no party can just veto what goes in and out. It needs to be justified as something that's not helping the construction.
My question to you is more about the process that you see about the federal government. Does that, what you've just seen, does that increases your support or decreases your support for the idea of having a common federal government? The way you saw this process.
No, it increases it. It increases it because it bridges the priorities of both sides.
All right, thank you. All right, let's go to the next legislation. And these are basically legislation that Nizar chose to, and that's a joint economic zone. Libby, would you please read this?
The Joint Economic Zone, JEZ, between Israel and Gaza. Exclusive IPC management and control and cooperation with the existing governments, and a common economy. Education, industry, banking, agriculture, sewer treatment, desalinization plants, solar farms, wind power, and green energy, international airport and seaport, equally accessible to Israeli and Palestinians. We hereby submit this legislation to the Israeli government, the Palestinian governments. We bestow upon them a veto power which may be exercised in the next 60 days.
Some of you may ask, why are we giving a veto power and why are we giving a deadline? The reason that, as opposed to just asking them, these governments, do you agree or not? The reason is that if we ask them, do you agree or not, they can take forever and to tell us whether they agree or not. And then they come up with all kind of excuses that would just prolong the process and make it very difficult to achieve. If we give them a veto power, and if we put a deadline, they have to act in a very precise way within a very precise time. So let's have the Palestinian parliament members please vote on this legislation. Palestinian parliament members. Publish the vote. We need 55% of the Palestinian parliament members. We got 100% of the Palestinian parliament members to agree. Let's have the Israeli parliament members please vote. Israeli parliament members. We need 55%. We got 100, publish the vote. We got 100% of them voting in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the president of Palestine. Mr. President, are you going to veto this legislation?
No, I
Mr.
am.
President.
I'm sorry. It's me, Palestine. Okay, yes, I will
Yes.
not. No, I will not veto this measure.
Okay. And Mr. Prime Minister of Israel, are you going to veto this legislation?
I would not veto it if we have an agreement. We talk about exclusive IPC management and control. How do I trust the IPC that you are not going to cave in to terrorists, or that you are not going to be cheated into investing money into covert actions that in reality are terrorist actions? I don't trust you. So quite frankly, I want to, at least at the initial phase, until I start trusting you, have my people supervise your management to make sure that what you're doing is correct, you are not being cheated, and that you are not colluding with any organizations that want to undermine Israel. So if you accept that we have observers checking on your management, then I would accept this legislation.
The mistrust is mutual, Mr. Prime Minister. And we will not agree. I think you used the term that something that sound like you want to control our management. We will not agree to a control by your government or by the Palestinian government. What we will agree is to work in cooperation with you, to have transparency with the Palestinian and the Israeli government. Remember, the parliament members and the people in our executive and the judicial branch are both Palestinians and Israelis. We are not your enemy. We are, yes, we have mistrust, but we are not your enemy. The people that are participating in our government want to have peace for themselves and for their families, whether they are Palestinians or Israelis. You are taking a point of view, treating us as if we are your enemy. We are not. we are helping your people live in peace. So
Yeah,
we're,
I'm not treating you as enemies. I simply need to build trust in you. You have to convince me that you are going to operate in a truly objective and honest way. I know that the members of your parliament are also Israeli citizens, and there are many Israeli representatives in your parliament. So that is already a sign of create some confidence in my mind. However, I am a right-wing prime minister, so it takes a long and I am, on the whole, not very reasonable when it comes to negotiating in an honest way. But there's some part of me which is reasonable and could be swayed. So you need to convince me, and I think on the whole, I would be willing to accept an arrangement on this, but I reserve the right to crush this whole initiative in the future if I see that it's not going my way. But so I will lift my veto. I will allow this.
all right. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Let's go to the next legislation, and that is Financial Foundation for the IPC. Libby, could you please read it?
Application to World Bank, other countries, and international organizations for a 5-year, $100 billion grant commitment to create a solid financial backing in order to implement the IPC's vision and its legislation in the next 5 years. Full financial transparency, directly related to proof of success.
All right, so this, we are using our political power, the power that was given to us by the people of Israel and Palestine in the election. The Israeli and the Palestinian governments do not get a veto power. They are dispensable when it comes to this legislation. Could we have the Palestinian parliament members please vote on this legislation? We need 55%. Please publish the vote. We got 100% of the Palestinian parliament members. And let's go to the Israeli parliament members.
I think you meant Israeli.
Israelis.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Publish the votes. We also got 100%. Nizar, I skipped you when I should have given you an opportunity to comment on the joint economic zone. So could you combine your comments regarding joint economic zone and the financial foundation? And if you can speak in terms of whether it makes, in your mind, the idea of a federal government a lot more or less appeal, whether it appeals to you more or less, based on what you've seen up to now.
Sure. So on the economic zone, I think there are a lot of ideas that can come up that the federal body is more equipped to do than the two governments. And I think it's all probably the lower hanging fruit, because in joint economic zones, you can have a different set of laws and regulations that apply, and therefore it doesn't put either government in a situation where their sovereignty is transgressed by one party. It's an agreement to have a different arrangement there.
I'm sorry, I don't qualify, quite follow what you're saying on this.
So I think that this confederate body, this parliament, this third parliament, is well placed to push for a joint economic zone, because in this case, you'll have the two parties in the same body hashing out what works, as opposed to a Palestinian government coming with something, Israeli government coming with something, and then duking it out, you're already starting from the wrong place. While in the joint parliament, no, you're working together. You're focusing on the issue. You're not competing, and it should be a lower hanging fruit for either governments. Because it's not one party imposing something on the other, it's agreeing to have a different set of rules that apply in the joint economic zone in ways that have, economic dividends for both parties. So I see less problems of either governments vetoing something like that. Now, to the financial foundation, I think it's tricky. Because if you're going to give this much money to this third body, both governments are going to feel that this is going to come at their expense, or there's a risk.
I think you misunderstand that. We're not giving any money. We are requesting. The federal government is asking the entire world to commit to a 5-year, $100 billion grant to us.
Yes, and usually when there's a competition for international grants, you see that. I've seen it in Palestine when there are NGOs and they're all competing for the same grant, right? So they start having an interest in undermining another NGO just because everybody's competing for the same money. So that is something that would need to be, that's more difficult than, I would argue, it was more difficult than the joint economic zone. But of course, the full financial transparency would be good in that it could model for both governments what it looks like to have a government that's transparent, that shows where its money is coming from and where it's going. That I think is a positive that the federal this third parliament will have, the IPC would have as a positive externality, let's say, on the Israeli and the Palestinian government, is that it shows people that here are Palestinians and Israelis working together, and they're producing something or working in something that's so very transparent in ways that the Palestinian and the Israeli government are not. So it's another example of how you can disconnect, let's say, the stereotypes. Oh, the Palestinians are corrupt. Oh, the Israelis are corrupt, right? And showing, no, when people are dedicated to a mission, right, which is in this case Palestinians and Israelis working together for projects, they actually can come with something transparent. So the issue is not with a culture or a people. The issue is, are you focused on the mission, or are you focused only on, are you focused on results, or are you focused on your own power? So again, I think that's a positive thing that the IPC could be doing.
Precisely, and because we are committed to a constitution and to a transparent system, we are more likely to attract money from all over the world, and because we are elected, we are more likely to attract money from all over the world.
And I mean, it's a self-selecting group that accepts the Constitution. So you're already starting from a pool of people that are oriented towards cooperation, unlike the national governments that actually might be elected based on not cooperating, right?
Right.
So again, that's because I agree with you. There is so much stuck on this conflict because of this wrong perception, and I would argue it is sinister, that Palestinians and Israelis have been fighting each other for thousands of years, which is just a cop-out to say that to not deal with the conflict, right? So I think it's a good example that can undermine that stereotype.
I agree. Yeah.
Can I ask a question for Nizar?
Sure.
Yeah.
Nizar is also, I'm very happy to see you here, Nizar. So my question to you is regarding the economic joint zone. Are you familiar with Atarot?
Yeah.
So my house is actually very near Atarot. I drive through it, like when I'm back home, I drive through it like all the time. So Atarot is an industrial area in north of Jerusalem where you have, it's basically a bunch of warehouses, industrial zones, and it mostly employs Palestinians from the West Bank. And there's companies there like bakeries, for example, that are owned by Palestinians and Israeli companies. So these economic things already do happen, but they're sort of done. And I believe there's some under industrial zones in the north as well. I'm not sure, but there may be. But these things are also done by private. So a lot of private companies would actually participate in this as well because Palestinian labor is needed, and investment, Israeli investment is needed. So in a way, it could be also incentivized by these private companies. Would you agree?
Yeah. I mean, what it allows is for this diversity, right? Where I'm also thinking like Gaza Sky Geeks and what have you, that
Yes.
the incubators, right? You're
Yes.
bringing Arab-speaking Palestinians with a certain skill set, and you're bringing Jewish and speaking Israelis, right? So you have a bigger pool of talent working together. I actually did not know that there were like Arab bakeries or stuff like
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that
Samara.
was actually owned.
Yeah, for Samara Bakery is in Atarot. You can actually go get your kak from there. But it has
Nasir,
to
we
be
have to move on.
Yeah, but real quick, it has to be
Yeah.
owned by, it's usually by people who have residency or citizens in Israel. So West Bank people cannot do it. And that's what I would say the difference is
Okay.
that we have to open it up to people in the West Bank to have ownership of companies.
All right. This
Okay.
is the last legislation that before we take the survey. Libby, could you please read it?
All right, this is one about taxation alliance between the Israeli and Palestinian governments with the IPC. The introduction. For the first time in history, the people of this region formed a mutual constitution and elected a secular democracy with enormous benefits to the people of Israel and Palestine, as well as their governments, by providing peace, security, economic opportunities, and substantial reduction in governmental operating costs. Therefore, the IPC is proposing the following legislation. We hereby request the Israeli and Palestinian governments provide the following tax reductions to their taxpayers and subsidies to the IPC. All taxpayers obligated to the Israeli or Palestinian governments who opt in shall receive a 3% deduction in their taxes and an additional 3% of their taxes to be paid directly to the IPC. This legislation is submitted to the Israeli and Palestinian governments to exercise their veto power in the next 60 days.
So basically, on the tax form, Israelis or Palestinians who want to support the IPC will be able to check a box, and in the box they will say, I am supporting the IPC, and I am willing to accept to turn over 3% of my taxes to the IPC, and in addition, I will get 3% reduction in my taxes. So this legislation, this would bring funding to the IPC. It would increase the IPC's power and give the people of Israel and Palestine a solid government that would give them peace, and it would benefit the person himself who is supporting the IPC. It will encourage IPC support. Does anyone have any questions before we take a vote and go to Nizar? Does anyone have a question? All right. Palestinian parliament members, please vote. Do you support Palestinian parliament? We need 55% of the Palestinian parliament members. Please vote. Publish the vote. We got 100% of the Palestinian parliament members. Let's go to the Israeli parliament member. Please vote. Israeli parliament members, please vote. And publish the vote. Also 100%. what you may want to ask me, and I think it's a real problem, is that the IPC then becomes, in a way, dependent on the Israeli and the Palestinian governments for its survival, which I think may not be a good idea for the IPC, but nevertheless, we have to deal with reality. Those governments exist, and we will try to get other sources for funding. Let's go to before we go to Nizar, let's go to the Palestinian parliament member, Palestinian president. Mr. President, are you going to veto this legislation?
So to clarify, does this take away from our tax revenues that we collect?
Yes, it does.
Mm-hmm.
You will have 6% less tax than you
3%.
collect.
3%.
6%.
6%.
Yes. In other words, 3% will go to your taxpayer, and 3% will go to us.
That's a tough one. I'm not going to.
Yeah, but you get peace.
Yeah,
you
I'm
get
not going to.
less spending on military and less spending on, and you increase the opportunities for your people, the economic opportunities for your people. So overall, your economy will grow substantially more.
And also, President Nasir, just so that you know, the PA really sucks at at collecting the taxes.
Collecting
so
taxes,
it's not,
I know that.
yeah, it's not gonna really make a difference.
Yeah. The only taxes we collect are like the VAT taxes. But okay,
Yeah.
I will not veto this because I know the Israeli counterpart will. So go ahead.
But that question would probably be asked by the Prime Minister of Israel. Mr. Prime Minister, are you going to veto this legislation?
Thank you for allowing me to express my views. It's very interesting that the Palestinian president decided to not veto it, counting on my veto. That's a very interesting alliance between the two countries, not to be able to, in order not to spend money and at the same time take credit for not being the one who does it. So I'm supposed to be the bad guy to veto it. I can say that, in fact, the sums that you are proposing are vast. 6% is an enormous amount of money. It would take maybe 10 years of budgetary adjustment for us to be able to account for such an amount of spending. But it would, you are right, it would give us some control on the IPC because we will be able to turn the money spigot off. But it is in all totally unacceptable. I would be more willing to talk about much smaller percentages of voluntary contributions from Israel to the IPC budget, not on the basis of taxpayers opting in or out, but just a voluntary contribution by Israel, a commitment, even of a multi-year commitment, but not a taxation arrangement of the kind that you have described.
First of all, this is not 6% reduction in your taxes. It's 6% only within those people that opt in. And as you know, only 2 million Israelis voted. And it doesn't even mean that those 2 million people will opt in. So your characterization of 6% reduction is inaccurate. Second, with regard to you giving us funding, we will decline that, or my tendency is to decline that, because that will increase our dependence on your government. And
that's exactly my intention.
Yes, and we do not want to be dependent on your government. We want to be dependent on the taxpayers. So what I am suggesting is for you to remove what if we reduce that from 6% to 4% with 2% deductions in taxes for the individual and 2% coming to us?
Can I before he says that, can I also add that I wouldn't necessarily not veto this, even if he did or did not veto it. Remember, taxes that are collected at the border are held by Israel, transferred over to the Palestinian Authority when they want to, minus their 5% merchant service fees. So this could be a source for this revenue as well. If we can control our money that we receive for taxes, rather than waiting for Israel to transfer to us and pay a merchant service fee of a small 5 or 10% fee.
Okay,
I
so
think-
you are
I
still
think this
not
is separate. I think, Nasir, this is separate. The VAT tax is separate from the income tax within the PA.
That's true. But
So-
we can prepare legislation on that too. Go
Okay.
ahead, Mr. President, Prime Minister.
So what Nizar talked about the difference between income tax and VAT. I would agree, instead of income tax, to allow a percentage of VAT collected in Israel to be allocated to the Palestinian Authority, and not on a voluntary basis, but I would guarantee that across the board.
I'm sorry, we are not the Palestinian Authority. We are the federal government.
Sorry, the IPC. So I wouldn't mind doing that operation. Of course, it's still, again, because I've got my schemes to be able to control the whole thing. But that's an idea. But I would also suggest let's try your idea of a 4% voluntary at the moment. Over the next say 3 years, we commit to allowing this scheme to continue, and we will see after that whether this continues to be acceptable to us. But I cannot give you a broad acceptance beyond 3 years.
All right, that's fine. I just want to point out a point that has not come up yet with regard to Israel. We are actually going to be saving you billions and billions of dollars on security, because we are bringing peace to the area, and we will be able to make peace not only between the Palestinians and the Israelis, but also with the neighboring countries. And therefore, we will be saving you substantial amount of money and also helping increase your economy because of the new reality in the Middle East. So don't be so stingy on that 2% or 3% when we are bringing you so much benefit.
Okay, you have 3 years to prove your point.
All right, thank you. Okay, let's go to the next. We have 100%. We had 100% acceptance or support for the federal government before the simulation. Let's take a survey right now. Do you support a common federal government? Okay, 10 more seconds. Please vote. Last time we had 23 people voting yes. Now we need more of you to vote. Don't be shy. You can vote no if you feel it no. I mean, all right. And the poll. The poll, 100%, 20 of you voted yes. I assume the 3 are gone or whatever. Don, did you vote yes on both surveys?
Yes, I did. 100%.
Okay. Or are you making a distinction between your personal views and your views as a parliament member?
No, well, I'm answering the survey on my personal views, and I do
Okay.
support very much the IPC Confederation concept, but I have severe, maybe this leads to the general discussion, concerns about the extremism in the governing parties of both sides, particularly the Israeli side, as to how this could be effectively come into play. So that's really my biggest concern in all of this, given the environment. I would have been before, now more than ever.
Okay.
Can I Can I, Don and Libby both kind of asked a question related to that. Can we move on to that, Joseph? Is that all right? Or is it too early?
Yeah, let's go to, but I just want a closing remark, and then
Sure,
we'll
sure.
go to open discussion with Nizar. And Nasir, you can manage the open discussion. Closing remarks, a common democratic government, confederation government can bring peace and will bring peace, in my opinion. Online elections are feasible. We spoke about substantial amount of money to make that a reality. We're really speaking about somewhere around $100 million. Israel is, and Gaza and all the other countries are spending a lot more than $3 billion a week on the ongoing wars, and it's been going on for almost a year or more than a year. The Israeli and the Palestinian governments are not legitimate government in Israel, Palestine. They're not elected by the people of Israel and Palestine. A federal government will be the only federal legitimate government in Israel and Palestine. And because of that, we'll have the political power and the political legitimacy to make peace, just like a democracy could make peace. So I just want to go over what Abraham Lincoln said. Government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. And that's what we are proposing for Israel and Palestine. So when you go to the open discussion, please remember those assumptions. And please remember what Nizar said. He said that those assumptions could be achieved, that they are really realistic assumptions. This is what we can buy for $100 million, or end this horrible violence between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and create a federal government that would respect all of us and give us end to this violence. So Nasir, you can take over and manage the open discussion. And I'm just taking a short break.
Sure. Before you go,
and I'll be right back.
Oh, I was going to say, before you go, the question from Don and Libby, that at what point is it possible for the IPC to take over as the only government body? Is the goal of the IPC to eventually be the sole government for Israel and Palestine? Because I don't think that's the case.
The goal is to make them as irrelevant as possible. Eventually, maybe in 50 or 100 years, the people of Israel and Palestine will realize that the federal government will make so much sense, and the Israelis and the Palestinians could maintain their own identity, and they don't need a repetitive government, and they will eventually learn to live with each other in peace, and they will decide on their own, if they so choose, to have one government. But the goal is not for the IPC to have one government. The goal is peace.
Thank you, Joseph.
So all right, I'll be right back.
So right now, during this discussion period, we open the floor to anyone. You can raise your hand and we'll call on you. We want to give an opportunity for our guest also to comment. He's and here, so we can hear him. So please, if you have questions, just make them as brief as possible to give everybody an opportunity and to hear him more. Does anybody have any questions to start? Chander, did you raise your hand? Go ahead, Chander. Unmute your mic, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Very quickly, I had brought this up about 4 or 5 months ago, 6 months ago. And this relates to a situation. I'm not too clear how to make this recommendation that I'm thinking of. I've been thinking the last 4 or 5 months into a legislative proposal, so to speak. And that is where I'm getting stuck, is this, that indeed non-dispensable for veto purposes is the use of military So use a police force, but I'm not too clear how the military gets affected, for the reason being that India and China, having the third largest and the fourth largest armies in the world, nuclear powered, both countries having nearly the industrial level scale of the killing power, industrial level killing power, brutal power, and yet for the last 60 years, the 3,000 border shared with the two countries, antagonists, but for 60 years they've been only hand-to-hand combat. The new commanders who come in the 3,000 border are greeted by the other party. They teach each other how to do karate, the tai chi, karate, all the martial arts, but they don't, under the risk of being court-martialed, have been allowed or used on their own any lethal, any guns or drones or rifles or anything else. And only recently, last 3 weeks ago, the government's also officially at the BRICS conference endorsed this view and made it a permanent thing. So that sort of thing can also apply to this IPC proposal, but I'm not too clear how to put this into a proposal for proposed legislation, because it may hit into the non-dispensable options available to the existing government. So maybe I can put an email to one of you, and then maybe Mr. Joseph can assist in if that is worthwhile to be considered now, or once the IPC is set up 30, 40 years down the road.
So, yeah, to answer your question, you're able to submit. You have Joseph's email,
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
josephfsr@gmail. Yeah, just you can propose like legislations like that. Nizar, would you like to make a comment regarding what he?
Yeah. So Chander, is it
Yes.
so in the China-India case, if a soldier does use a gun, an Indian soldier shoots at a Chinese soldier, what happens?
Hasn't happened for 60 years.
I know, but what's
The
the consequence?
Well, then the local commanders take action, because now
So
officially,
he gets punished
yes, absolutely, under the new,
by his Indian superior.
correct.
Okay.
And also the 20 people who died in 2020, 25 people died, not 2,500, not 25,000. They died hand-to-hand combat in the freezing waters. Some fell down, hit the rock.
Okay.
Even that there was no guns, no drones, no sniper bullets, no
Yeah.
nothing. Not even allowed in the base or bases. About 40, 50 bases along the 3,000 border. So this is something that, coming back to what Joseph said, the monies that can be saved, it doesn't guarantee the rocket fires or the military action and rebuttal taking place, but at least ordinary day-to-day combat across the border area, etc., can be mitigated by having an agreement that there shall be no force to kill.
Okay, Nizar, wouldn't you say that it's not a fair comparison, being that Pakistan and India have official borders, they have their own separate states and separate armies? I mean, we don't even have a border between the West Bank and Israel right now. We have settlements, we have armies, we have occupation, and no controls of borders. So I think
That's
that
my struggle.
well, that's of course, that's the key. It's the key. And I think that that's something you have to take into consideration, that you're not dealing with symmetrical powers here.
That's
Go
true.
ahead, Nizar.
Yeah, that is true. In theory, you could apply it where there's contact, so the wall. So it's just an agreement between both sides to not use lethal force. What needs to be worked out is the capacity of each government to make sure that they are able to punish anybody who does use lethal force. And Israel is probably going to argue that the PA has failed to do so in the past, just as much as the PA will tell the Israelis that they have failed to stop the settlers. So it's a question of capacity. And you are right, India and China are close in power, which is not the case between Palestine and Israel.
Right.
It's going to need some fleshing out.
Oh, absolutely. There's one little minor point. What has happened in the last 60 years is the confidence built between the commanders on both sides. When they see that the soldiers are not going to be in any position to kill each other, so they're always having this hand-to-hand combat and facing the border, because borders are not well defined. It's a Himalayan, 20,000 feet high. but the confidence built between the commanders. So whenever a new commander along the 3,000 kilometers, when the new commander comes in, the other party, they celebrate their arrival, honor their arrival. So the trust being built up, that is an intangible benefit. And but struggle is, how can this be put into a sort of how can one articulate this into a legislative proposal? In the next 26 months,
what Nazir is saying is like the actual situation on the ground is one where Israeli troops can and do go into Palestinian towns, arrest somebody and just leave, right?
Yes.
And the proximity allows for a Palestinian to go blow himself up in an Israeli town. So this happens.
Yes.
What do you do, right? So in theory, the Palestinian, authority would need to punish his family or something, right? So it's just, we need to take into consideration the different contexts, but the concept of waiving the right to use lethal force is a good idea, I think. The way it's gonna look is different.
It's a possibility, may not come to be, but it's a possibility to set them understanding that yes, it is feasible in both India, Pakistan, and in China are sworn enemies, or have been in recent past, in the last 200-300 years, or 100 years. So it's this idea that could be presented not in the form of a legislation, but the idea that IPC can play a role in that to mitigate the lethal border clashes. Will not prevent perhaps Iran or some other countries are throwing, bombing across the border. But it's this idea that only IPC can be trusted with proposing forward. And I'll stop here.
Okay.
Okay. Alan, did you have a question? I saw you raise your hand.
Yes, it's not, I really appreciate this and quite support what you're doing. I think in this, when you put money into the picture, it needs, besides the pledge of transparency, a little more fleshing as to how to operationalize the development of districts, of a voting process, of the gathering of delegates in some way, a physical structure of a meeting place, some sense of how in this time period the actual process will unfold in more of a business plan to see how very practical this is, and the budget is within reason as to the way things are spent these days. Anyhow, that would strengthen it in my view. And also that the reality on the ground is a lot of side by side.
Alan, I don't understand your question.
Oh.
What do you mean? Could you explain what you mean?
The presentation would be clearer, it seems to me, if the budget would say it's going to take us a year to develop the districts of the 300 districts, and this is the process we think we will use. And then it's going to take us another year or whatever to include the entirety of the voting population into the calculation of a vote, and then another time for the development of our parliament and a meeting place and so on. That's what I have in mind.
So you're asking for the presentation to go into the details of how the district will be created and how the elections will be conducted.
Something of that sort, to give some more reality to it, as the initial World Bank financing morphs into the tax from the people financing that was the next step in this.
Alan, do you know that we have already done this before? We already created in 2012 300 districts. We already had elections, and the districts were actually examined by a statistician who said that they are 99% accurate. But we had a full-page ad in the New York Times explaining that there is going to be an election on December 12, 2012. All of these technical issues are very simple to resolve. But we are showing the big picture. I don't think that the audience will be interested in getting into the minute details of the election. I mean, no government really gets into the minute details. You have to. So just to respond to your comments.
Well, I'm a newbie. I didn't know you were doing this in 2012, or I would have gotten on then. Thank you.
We've been doing it since 2001, I believe.
Uh-huh.
So, but we actually had the election. We had 300 parliament districts, and people have run. The election was not successful because there was no awareness of the election.
Yeah.
But all these technical issues are much easier to resolve now than they were 10 years ago, 12 years ago. Much easier to resolve now, the technical issues. But, okay, go ahead.
Go ahead, Gabriel. Unmute your mic, please. Go
Can
ahead.
you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
No, I may just share a bit of my thought process, just a little feedback for how I feel that the IPC is, as I could understand, I heard it many times, is actually the design of a federation rather than a confederation. It is a federation, in my opinion, not exactly a confederation. A federation and a confederation are two things which are very similar, but there are some differences. And the main difference is the way how they are, how they come into being, how they are made. But that's just the detail. I think that what I always think about when I think about an Israeli-Palestinian federation, I think that it is feasible. I think that it is the only way by which the people can have the full recognition of their rights in the area. But I also think that there is one component which is needed, which is a territorial design. There must be a territorial, I would say, configuration of which towns are Israeli, Palestinian, which are mixed, and there has to be also a constitution beyond the institutional configuration. The territorial component is essential because legislation requires as a key part the definition of a jurisdiction, and the jurisdiction has to be territorial because otherwise it's not going to work. There is at least one country which was made like this by two groups which were basically in a genocidal attitude between each other. That was a ferocious war, and they managed to create a federation, and that is Bosnia and Herzegovina. Bosnia, there are three groups in war with each other, and they managed to create a state which basically more or less works. It works because it is aided from the outside, because there is a security management with international contribution, and it also works because there is one difference between Bosnia and Israel. The problem is that a federation cannot take place as long as the United States provides Israel with $10 billion in weapons every year, and as long as the international community, the Western part, I mean that the European and some Western country provide total impunity to Israel. Because as long as the situation is so asymmetrical, the Israeli will have no reason, they will have no incentive in creating a federation, as long as they have this security privilege. As long as they can be able to implement an apartheid system, they will do that. they must be taken, that power must be taken away from them before the possibility of creating a federation. Okay.
Hey,
Gabriel,
Nizar,
can I respond to Gabriel?
yeah, and I wanted to clarify. I wanted to add something so that Nizar, go ahead, Joseph. But I wanted to.
Gabriel, you mentioned territorial. Yeah, it has territorial, and the territory is Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. It's not, and with respect to, I don't know if you meant territorial for the parliament districts, but the districts will be created with 47,000 people in each district. So the federal government will be for the whole area of Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. You also mentioned that it's more like a federal versus a confederation. We define it the same. We are saying whether it's federation or confederation, we define it the same way, which is the Constitution, which brings me to the third comment that you made, that it needs a constitution. Yes, it does need a constitution, and it has a constitution. The constitution is at ipconfederation.org, and both Palestinians and Israelis will have to swear allegiance to the Constitution. Now, you mentioned the precondition of the United States stopping its aid to Israel. I disagree with you. That's not, it would be nice if it stops its aid to Israel, but that's not a precondition. A federal government could be created whether or not the United States stops its free supplies of weapons to Israel.
Theoretically.
Okay.
What prevents the election from taking place, even if the United States continue to supply weapons to Israel?
No, he's talking about the implementation. That will be hard to implement, to get the Israeli government to implement it if it has the ability to not implement it and get away with it. So the pressure of the dependence on American aid would be the way to get the Israeli government to execute what the federal parliament did, asked or passed.
Actually, the federal government would be able to put pressure on the United States to accept the federal government and to limit its so-called support for Israel, because there is no need for further support for Israel, because we are making peace. The United States will not be able to use the excuse that it supports Israel to defend Israel, because the federal government will remove that underlying reasoning that Israel needs defense. It doesn't need a defense anymore because it has a way to make peace, even though the Israeli and the Palestinian, even though the Americans themselves were not able to make peace. Okay, sorry.
So
go ahead.
Yeah, I just think that goes against everything that we're seeing in reality. But Nizar, to continue what Gabriel was
but
saying,
we don't have a federal government. You can't say it goes against everything we are seeing. We don't have a federal government. What you see now is in the constellation of the Israelis and the Palestinians.
Joseph, every peace agreement that has actually even moved an inch has because of two reasons: because of pressure from the outside, mainly the United States, or because of necessity, a piece of necessity. For Israel to say, "Oh, there's a confederation and everything's going to be good and stuff," this is not going to motivate them. Giacomo actually represented that very well.
How do you know that?
Because this is what we've seen for the last 30, 40 years.
Yeah, but we haven't seen a federal government.
Yeah.
You're not comparing apples to apples. You're saying what we see now is Israel's dominance, and therefore, even if we have a federal government, Israel's hegemony of the area will continue. I don't
Okay.
I don't
Let
know
me-
that that's the reality. You
Le-
can't really say, based on what we see now, we will see that the same thing when we have a federal government.
Okay. Let me ask to continue on Gabrielle's questions and comments, and I ask Nizar. Nizar, do you think that for any confederation or federation proposal such as this one, that there are certain things like territory, Palestinian self-determination, and things that need to take place before this can happen? Because as a Palestinian, and you're a Palestinian, you know this, we're concerned about land seizures, we're concerned about settlements, we're concerned about future access to water, borders, freedom of movement, land seizures. I mean, in the last year, we've seen more land seizures in the West Bank than we've seen in the last 56 years of the occupation. So is it necessary so that we can have sort of a position? Because to say we are the confederation of Palestine and Israel, where we have a Palestinian government that doesn't really have any authority.
So you are correct. You do need some sort of change in the system where one party cannot prejudice the final status, right? So of course Israel has more ability to do that. So what is more, let's say, realistic, which is of course disadvantageous to the Palestinians, is that Area A and Area B are the ones we're talking about. And Area C is not. So Israel will not interfere in Area A and Area B, and Gaza would be also like an Area A or Area B. And the federation would be able to pass legislation that has to do with things that do not impact, settlement building and what have you in Area C. So the Palestinians are going to need to make the decision whether that is good enough or not, because this is basically a state with provisional borders. The other thing is you do need a sufficiently representative and sufficiently effective Palestinian and Israeli government to implement those laws or the bills that the federation passes. So it's, I mean, we're still talking abstract terms. So I agree with the previous comment that we need to hash it out a bit with more detail, because this proposal is a bit too high level, where everything could be. But there are a lot of things that go in all different directions. But yeah, the other thing also, Joseph, is a question of, do we need to have that pressure from the American government before the creation of the IPC, or you're arguing that the creation of the IPC is what's going to create pressure? What Nasir is referring to is that historically we have not seen the Israeli government, and in fact other governments, also Russia and others, do something that their sovereign institutions did not want to do, right? So that's a general challenge with intersection of jurisdiction. In theory, the UN and International Court of Justice have said that the wall is not on the borders, and therefore, to the extent that the wall is not on the borders, it's illegal. And not only has Israel not complied, countries who abide by the International Court have not taken actions based on that, right? So I think you are overestimating the capacity of this federal parliament to do things that sovereign states have not been able to do. So we're going to need to hash out a bit with more detail what are things that realistically it could do without the power of without executive power.
Thanks. Thank you, Nizar. I'm going to move to the next question, but I should also mention that Area B near Bethlehem, some territories were also as well seized recently.
Yeah.
And Nizar, I'm sorry, I didn't follow your comments. I didn't understand your comments. Are you saying that the IPC should not strive to exist until the US push for it? Or are you saying whether the US push for it, whether or not the US push for it, the IPC should strive to become a federal government?
I'm saying that we should do it anyways, but the things it works on, it needs to work on things that realistically it can deliver on. So if there is something that we know, and I guess this is where the veto power comes in. The worry that Nasir is bringing in is that the Israeli government can choose to not veto something, but then in reality, put obstacles or just not be responsive. There is nothing you could do to like punish it, except if you get, international community, including the US, to be the party that punishes or disincentivizes either government, whether the Palestinian government or the Israeli government, to foot drag or not implement what the federal government has passed. For that to happen, so they're interconnected. So we create the federal parliament anyways, and we make it transparent, and we make it, we show how it's more, in fact, it's more representative and more popular than the national governments, then it starts having leverage. You're assuming it. I'm saying we cannot assume that it's going to have more leverage. We need to design in things, including what topics it can touch upon, that make it more attractive and make it more popular to the Palestinians and Israelis than their governments are, which actually is not a high bar, to be quite honest. Right?
I'm sorry, actually, it's not what?
It's not a high bar for this federal government to be more popular than either Israeli government or the Palestinian government is a very low bar. It's not a very high bar. So that's why I think we should go ahead with it anyways, because there are a lot of things that 80% of Palestinians and Israelis would agree on, that would create the kind of, if you pass that legislation, would create the kind of momentum that would be pressure on the Palestinian government and the Israeli government.
Let me ask you a question. My experience with the Israelis, and to some extent with the Palestinians, is that the Israelis, the population, the people that I speak with, many of them, say they want peace, but in reality are more afraid of peace than they are of the Palestinians. They are afraid that peace would dismantle their identity. Their identity is connected to the conflict with the Palestinians. And if there is peace, their identity crumbles.
Yes and no. I mean, it's also on the Palestinian, like Azmi Bshara once said that if there is, if this conflict gets resolved, like half of the Palestinians would be out of a job. Definitely there are people invested. I would argue that the main challenge is in the premise upon which the Zionist movement was created, which is whenever Jews are not a majority, whenever Jews are not in complete control of their fate, bad things happen, right? So they would like peace. They don't trust that to put their safety in the hands of anybody other than their sovereign Jewish government. That has been the idea that's been hammered to Zionists for the last 100 years, right? Even before the creation of Israel. So when we say, oh, we need to have the federal government have its police and secure, like the Chandler's suggestion, that no lethal force would be used between the Palestinian and Israeli forces, I would see how the majority of the Israeli population, especially after October 7th, would be not comfortable with that, because they'd say, oh, this is utopian. We allowed the Palestinians to have weapons in Oslo, and then they use those weapons against us, blah, 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 right? So there is an element of feeling, right? A general intuition, that even if you make the rational argument, they will still feel uncomfortable and will resist the idea of having any part of their safety contingent on somebody other than their sovereign sovereign representation. So even like now they have issues with the fact that they are so dependent on the US, right? That's what October 7th did, is that just now the Israelis realized the extent to which they are unable to keep themselves safe by themselves. They so are dependent on Europe and on the US to provide for safety. And that's a very scary place to be, because like it undermined, it upended the whole assumption of Zionism, right? So it's the kind of thing that would require so much horrors to happen. And maybe that's the silver lining of October 7th, is that both population realize with all the horrors that they have not been able to solve the problem.
Right.
With all the horrors, the other side is strong enough to inflict enough pain. We are unable to keep ourselves safe without the cooperation of the other. So hopefully the horrors of October 7th are gonna, like, and the war, of course, I'm referring to the whole situation, because we are in a different situation. We're not in 1990s Oslo. More like a big chunk of the left in Israel became right, because they thought that the assumption was correct, and now they realize, no, the assumption is not correct. We cannot trust Arabs. We cannot trust the international community. We cannot trust. We were right in putting the siege on Gaza. With all the siege, look what they did. Imagine if we didn't do the siege, right? So that's going to take a lot of unlearning, which happened in the first Intifada. After the first Intifada, there was a genuine shift in people's view. Now, it would be much easier if we had better leaderships. I would argue somebody like Marwan Barghouti would make a very big difference in that regard, right? Somebody, a Marwan Barghouti equivalent in Israel, would be able to shepherd people to take the risk, because they feel it's very risky to make peace. It's very risky to work with the other party to work on our security. But what happened in the last war was so horrendous, we do not have a better idea, right?
All right, Nasir, you want to?
Yeah. Don, you had your hand up, but you removed it. Did you no longer have a question or comment?
Yeah, I had a question for Nizar and, for Joseph and the IPC, but, given the extreme circumstance, almost apocalyptic situation we're in right now, how does an entity like the IPC, which I've been sitting in on these simulations for 1 or 2 years, of great guests like yourself today, and an incredible discussion, kind of bridge the gap realistically? Because the simulation is such a far jump from where we are today. And I'm just wondering out loud,
Gap in
your
what?
thoughts on it. How
Gap
a
in
group
trust?
like this can create a public peace process of sorts to bridge the gap while it tries to become a real entity.
The gap in political views or gap in trust?
No, I mean a gap in reality. There's extremist government in Israel. There's I consider Hamas an extremist entity. And what we're simulating is so far from reality that there's going to be 14 million, 9 million people voting, and there's going to be this entity. My question is, how can a group like the IPC, that is doing some incredibly good work, kind of bridge the gap and create kind of an interim process, a public peace process, take this legislation to the next level, maybe where more thought is given to it, and we really bring it out.
The way I see it is, I agree with you that people are in much more extreme now because of what happened, which, not so ironically, I would argue, also makes the case for the immutability of the other side. Like with all these horrors, we're still at square one. We're not any closer to where we want to be, right? And that's going to take time. I'm not assuming this is going to come in the first year or 2 years. It's going to take time. And in that meantime, because everything we tried before didn't work, there's going to be that mentality. There is a lot of pressure inside Palestine over the performance of Hamas, the performance of the Fatah and everybody, right? That you do have, because they're the people with the stake who had most people die, or a family die, they would be looking at new ways of thinking, and the federation would be one idea, right? So you do have a different situation in both elements, in the horror, but also in the openness, because of the horror, the openness to new ideas, right? This is the paradox of like the First and Second World Wars, right? Who would have thought that France and Germany would like be the pillars for the European Union after hundreds of years of hating each other, right? So it's kind of believing that when you're hit a wall, right? That for example, now there are more Israelis that believe that there is no military solution. There didn't before, right? And I believe now a lot of Palestinians believe that too. So what this federation idea allows is, rather than people, independently atomized think of things or what could we do differently, well, there is federation idea, right, that is out there to stimulate, just like the Geneva Initiative stimulated ideas of what it would look like for Palestinians and Israelis to work together, like in combatants. What does it look like for Palestinians and Israelis to, on the ground, work on an issue that they care about, right? So that the example, and I do think that the example of transparency and representation, the fact that they would be closer representing their constituents better than the national governments do, as well as the transparency, would make both governments look bad, right? And would put pressure on them to perform better. So even if the result of that is that both governments start performing better and the federation stops existing, that's a good outcome too, right? So long as we come to a point where the realization is of the importance of representation and the importance of, the difference between theory and practice. Like, practically speaking, yes, it would be great if we get rid of the other people, but we failed, right? So practically speaking, we know there is no military solution. So what can we do that would actually give us the minimum of what we want? First of which is, of course, safety, and then economic prosperity. So that's something that I think the federation allows, would be a space where this could happen.
Don, to answer your question, I agree with a lot of what Nizar is saying. I think that there is a huge silver lining to the October 7th, and I'll tell you what it is. Before October 7th, Israeli political system was falling apart. And the reason it was falling apart was because there was not a democracy, a real democracy in Israel. And there was tremendous mistrust within the Israeli society between the two main segments in Israeli society. And there were demonstrations on a daily basis, and there were talks about Israel collapsing. October 7, okay, let me go back to the Palestinian side. On the Palestinian side was also falling apart. There was huge mistrust between Hamas and the PA. They were not seeing eye to eye. October 7 made it clear that the Israeli government and the Palestinian governments are not able to give peace or security to the Israeli people or the Palestinian people. It's true that both sides have become more extremist, but there is a strong segment in both sides that are doubting the ability of their own government to deliver anything, peace or security, to their people. And those two segments in the Israeli society and in the Palestinian societies, the IPC would actually bring them together. They would both realize that this is the way to go, is to work together, because they don't trust their own people anyways. So and because they don't have transparency on both sides. So what they will eventually realize, that a transparent democratic system based on democracy is the way to go. And the people in Israel and Palestine, the Palestinians and the Israelis, who will understand that, are much more likely to cooperate and vote for an election, because well, one thing is they have nothing to lose, and second, they will realize that it's a good system that will give them peace and security. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah.
The missing element that we have is awareness. If we are able to create awareness, the creation of a federal government is easy. It's not a technical question. It's awareness. It's not a money question either.
I agree with so much of what you're saying. I'm simply asking you and asking the group, is there a way to take all this work that's being done in these simulations to the next level and create a more public process of this legislation, more thought to it, and bring it out to the public? Because the leadership is failing. So I'll leave it there. Gabriele wants
If you can get us an article in the New York Times, then all the other papers will follow. I mean, look, the New York Times will be followed by other papers, and then the discussion that we are having will continue all over the world.
Well,
and
we need that.
We can create this federal government if there is an awareness. The media is refusing. It's actually refusing to deal with it.
Would you compare it to something like Peace Now, which like in the beginning was like seen as a fringe element, and then in the 1980s it became very popular, and still right now is pretty active, even though they're kind of.
No, I will compare it to the Me Too movement.
Okay.
The Me Too movement, there was sexual harassment of women on the job for centuries, ever since men and women existed together. But one article in the New York Times, in the New Yorker magazine, changed that reality all over the world.
Okay. So let's go. Gabriel, did you want to? You have your hand up. Go ahead. But before you go, Nizar, are you good on time?
Yeah. Well, one thing I just wanted to add, which is I agree with Joseph that the main stuck is the lack of trust with the leaderships, right? So the fact that Oslo was agreed in secret, like that was a huge problem. Like, because even if Oslo had good ideas, people dismissed it because it was agreed on in secret. Ergo, it just helped, it fueled all the conspiracy theories, right? Excuse me. So when Olmert and Abbas came up with bridging ideas, they both felt that they could not sell it to their constituents. So if you have a process by which people actually start hashing out what would it look like if I get this on refugees, then I'm willing to give that on borders. That kind of process, usually what we've seen in second tracks is that indeed people move from posturing into actual pragmatic ideas, right? And the process itself helps dispel a lot of the stereotypes they have about the other, and which is the source of the hopelessness, right? Like one of the things that people need to understand is when you experience trauma, when you experience that the other side committed horrible things against you, there is a dissonance of how could a human being do X, right? So the vilification of the other, while it is reassuring because it's a simple explanation, they are evil, so the solution is to get rid of them. The reality is the shock and the like fundamental fear that human beings can do such horrible things, right? So once you have a process by which Palestinians and Israelis are working separately, like Geneva, like this federation, without the pressure of delivering, to their national governments, you start seeing what is or is not possible. You start seeing that the monstrosity that you saw from one side is actually just an expression of the deep fear and the deep insecurity they feel about their capacity to protect themselves, right? Just like civil wars, right? Like, why would a neighbor do such horrible things in Bosnia and in the Yugoslav war, right? It's because you thought the society was working and the fact that they are Christian or Muslim didn't matter, and suddenly, no, it matters, and they're your neighbor. So you need to vilify them in order to come up with a solution that is clean and makes sense, despite the fact that it's not realistic. What's good about the federation and this, let's say, supranational space is that it allows for the exploration and for the debunking of a lot of assumptions that people take for granted. Now, I just want to caution here that you have in both societies, you have two conclusions that people are drawing from October 7th. One is drawing that, oh my God, these people are worse than we thought. We need to, like, this is 1948, a revision of 1948, right? So the conclusion they're getting is that, no, we haven't been harsh enough. And there is another set of people, so their conclusion is that we need to be harsher. And there's another set of people that are realizing, oh my God, we are unable to protect ourselves. We thought we are able to protect ourselves, and we cannot. So again, the federation would allow for that conversation of the latter group, not the former, but arguably it will be, because of October 7th and what followed, they have the empirical data to say, no, more force actually does not work. These people did not leave. They are still here, right? So clearly, even when you do something as horrible as October 7th or something as horrible as the genocide that's happening in Gaza, both those extreme things did not move the needle. You can build settlements in Gaza, you can push 1 million Palestinians out, but you still have 5 million Palestinians, right? So that's where the latter group could work within the federation in realizing that you come up with better solution when the people are involved from the beginning, as opposed to have the national governments represent the national people, right? And then the national governments discussing how to bridge. If you start the bridging from the bottom up, I mean, this is an opportunity. I'm being exceptionally inarticulate. I guess what I'm saying is that the federation, the IPC, is an opportunity for people to try out what is it like to start from the bottom up as opposed to from the top bottom, which is which people, I would argue, on both sides are very hungry for. They just don't see it. The IPC allows them to play around with it.
Thank you, Nizar.
Sure.
Again, like I said, you're good for time because we're going to 11.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have no life.
Can I
Okay.
just say
Like the rest
one
of
or
us.
two things? Nadia, can I just-
Olivia, can go ahead because
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon.
No,
Oh, sorry.
Gabriel did
Can I-
speak, so go ahead. Gabriel, I'm gonna let Olivia
thank
go
you very
because
much.
she spoke.
Thank you very much.
You spoke. Go ahead.
Okay, that's okay. I won't put on the camera because I'm blowing my nose all the time with a handkerchief. Well, you've spoken. I identify a lot with what the gentleman in California says, and I've seen him as a participant, several times. He says, "Let's talk about reality," and you have been talking about Israelis as though, and the Israeli establishment, as though you're talking about people that are remotely normal. I don't see one iota of mental sanity in this bunch, in this political establishment that is ruling the country. And they get the support, opinion polls show that they get support, more than 50%, 60% support the war, don't want an end to the war. They want everything. They want their hostages back, etc., etc. It's a sick society. It is sick, sick, sick society. There would have to be, if there's going to be any future for Israel and Jewish people in Israel, they would have to have a de-Zionization process. Some, whether you call it a truth and reconciliation procedure, I call it a de-Zionization. Otherwise, there would be no room for Zionists in a future country where Palestinians actually had rights. At the moment, it's quite normal to hate them and to want revenge. They seem to be stuck. I've been reading a lot about what the politicians are saying. They are delusional. They are lunatics. How do you negotiate with lunatics? It's very, very difficult, almost impossible. With outside force, well, I mean, the Biden administration is an embarrassment. We, by the way, are complicit in the genocide of your people, Nasir. We are paying for this with our taxes. 1 or 2 European countries have opted out, but we in the West are financing the killing of your people. I think we have to take on board this. So to distract the attention of Israelis from Gaza, or the world from Gaza, they're now bashing up the Lebanon, they bashed up the West Bank. Then they have these crazy ideas. I've read a lot about what Ben-Gvir says on Smotrich and Netanyahu about moving. Ben-Gvir says then they're going to move on to Damascus. These people are crazy. It's very difficult to negotiate seriously with people who are crazy. They've done very stupid
Olivia,
things.
but if I may interrupt, I mean, this is...
Of course you can. Yeah, sure.
This is...
Of course, I agree with you. Nazir, I appreciate very much your being here. Just let me add their mistakes. They've killed off all the leaders, including the moderate one who was Nasrallah. They've just killed them off. Who do you negotiate with? I mean, and that was just to sort of, to boost the morale and make the government seem, oh, we're the good guys, we're getting them. No, all this killing, where has it got them? Have they got back their hostages? No. It gives them a feel-good feeling when they kill your people.
But the hostages, they're willing to sacrifice the hostages. That has never been the case.
I agree with you. I agree. Yes, but the skilled people are leaving Israel. Investors are pulling out. Their economy is on a downhill slope. There will soon be poverty. The war in Gaza has been a gigantic flop.
So let me...
What future has Israel? Sorry. Go ahead. I listen. Go ahead. Sorry.
So I'm not diminishing the level of horror, right? So this is our Holocaust as Palestinians, right? The horrors we've seen, in addition to the people seeing and not doing enough. Of course, people are trying to do something, but the fact that a year into it, 50,000 people dead into it, and still we're unable, people are still thinking that voting Harris and Democrats is a good idea, right? I take all of that. But I also understand that nobody does something knowing that it's bad for them. The challenge, I agree with you, is that to the extent that Zionism is the expression of self-determination of the Jewish people, it's premised, it's premised, it's premised on the fact that for thousands of years, when Jews were a minority, they were always dependent on the goodwill of whoever was ruling, and you kept getting pogroms. Ergo, the solution is to have a state with the Jewish majority. And the last 4 elections, the Israelis, when they were asked whether they wanted the state to be Jewish or democratic, they selected Jewish, right? So when push comes to shove, it's more important for the state to be Jewish than to be democratic, right? So that's the majority of what people voted. Now, you understand where that's coming from, because if for 70 years you've been fed that the world is a dangerous place, Jews are not safe anywhere except in Israel, and the Holocaust, everybody the Holocaust is just one step away. If that's all you know, and you see something like October 7th happening after, Egypt has been pacified, Iraq was destroyed, Syria and Lebanon are destroyed, Iran has been put on sanctions, and the Gulf states are dying to work with Israel. If with all of that, and of course Jordan and Egypt protecting Israeli borders, if with all of that you still had a day where it was the most amount of Jews killed since the Holocaust, that's basically proof that Zionism or whatever they were doing failed, right? So they're not gonna admit it, but you can understand why people can go to the other extreme and say, oh my God, no, we're really under danger. After all we did, this is not enough. We need to double down. Just like Netanyahu's argument that more
I
violence,
understand what you're
the solution
saying.
for
Sure.
more violence is going to work.
Nizar, I want to thank you because I have to go to go to visit my grandkids. So I want you guys can go on. I just have to leave.
Okay.
My grandkids are waiting, and I'll have Nasir. But Nizar, I want to thank you so much for participating and for your generosity. We are 2.5 hours into this simulation, and so I need to go to. My grandchildren are waiting, but you guys can continue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nizar.
Thanks, Joseph.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
On the opposite side, and I'm not saying there is equality, but it is a similar dynamic that's emanating from fear. When the Arabs and Muslims experienced colonialism, when Napoleon occupied Egypt, right, that was a real shock. It was our October 7th, where we realized that, oh my God, those Westerners are so advanced, and we are way, way too weak for them, right? So the reaction of the Islamists, right, the people who believe that the problem is that we moved away from the righteous way of Islam, from the orthodox way of Islam, that we've allowed corrupting ideas to corrupt our understanding of the religion. We need to go to the religion the pure form of our religion. That's coming not as a theological answer, but as an actual existential answer, that we are under threat of erasure by the West, cultural erasure, right? And therefore, we need to fight back. We need to reject everything that's Western. And then this is not enough. Oh, we need to use violence. This is not enough. We need to use suicide bombers, right? So it's a similar dynamic. Again, I'm not drawing equalities, but it is a similar dynamic that of how you function, how communities function from a place of fear. And therefore, and I was one of them, right? Justifying suicide bombers, right? You are killing kids. And we say, oh yeah, but they are killing our kids. Until their kids get killed, they won't understand, right? So that logic has its own momentum. So you cannot, it's natural, that's what I want to say. It's natural for people to think that more violence, that this violence didn't work, we need more violence. That's a natural reaction. It's an incorrect one. It's a not wise one, but it is natural. There's nothing not human in it. It's very human when you see somebody coming from the dark to shoot them, because it's safer to shoot somebody who's innocent than not to shoot, and then it turns out that it's somebody that means you harm. So that reptilian reaction that all of us have is natural, and it's going to take a lot of effort to fight against it, to make people have that's why courage is so valued in all cultures, because courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is acting despite your fear, right? That requires working from the other side. And I would argue that there is we need to look at it that way, that these are human beings who are doing horrible things, just like Nazis did horrible things because they felt that the world was did them wrong in the First World War, right? That was an easy argument to make to them, but it was a wrong argument. But it was an easy one. It didn't require it didn't require anything from them. It didn't require them to look inside. So what I see beneficial in this federal parliament is a space where you can have that conversation of what it would look like to come up with legislation from the bottom up, as opposed to from the top bottom, because a lot of the bad leadership is coming from the same, which is also here in the U.S., is that the best of two evils, right? The better of two evils, right? Which is very unambitious. So yes, it's very ambitious to think that we can create this third entity that is built on the grassroots up, but it's the fact that it's ambitious that's going to make it competitive with this is the best we've got, better than this is the better of two evils, right? So I think
sure.
the horrors are going to help a lot of people, is going to motivate a lot of people who are disillusioned with if force didn't work, we need more force.
Sure. I find what you say very interesting, very, very interesting. I listened carefully. But bear in mind that in the future, the US won't be the strongest country in the world.
That's true.
The BRICS countries are becoming stronger, and they greatly favor, they have enormous sympathy with Palestine, and they greatly favor the Palestinians. So we hope
Sympathy is not like interest.
We don't know, what's going to happen, what these BRICS countries, how they're going to organize themselves. We don't know yet, but we do know that they won't take orders from the US.
Sure,
they're fed up
but
with
that
being
does not
bossed
automatically
around by
mean
the US. They're fed
that
up
does
with
not
being bossed around by the US.
Sure, but that doesn't necessarily mean that China and Russia are gonna fight Israel and create a.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree
Yeah.
with you. And at the
Yeah.
same time, the US is becoming less powerful, and the UK, in the future, they won't be so powerful. Until now, and I think the big thing missing, but the US has never understood, that you don't solve political problems militarily. I mean, look at all the wars they've
I
fought.
understood
Other
that.
people
That's,
have paid the
yeah,
price. Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq.
Olivia,
They wreak
again,
havoc.
I understand, but tell me one empire that had disproportionately bigger military power that didn't fall into this trap. It's the fact that the US has so much disproportionate power that it keeps erring on the side of military actions in ways that Singapore doesn't, right?
Sure.
Yes.
Well, absolutely.
When it's so available, and the same with Israel, it's because it's so available. The fact that they have aerial superiority and technological superiority is exactly what led them to October 7th, right? That's the blind spot. It's easier to fight and kill as opposed to talk and because diplomacy takes longer. It's just easier to just shoot the guy, right?
Sure.
Interesting.
Sure. And also, I think communications technology has changed a lot. If I see something awful, I can film it with my mobile. I mean, and it can go viral. That has changed things radically. Independent journalism has changed things radically, as opposed to,
I would agree that it has changed things, but I think, Olivia, there's limitation to change because, for example, when it came, and I'm sorry, Gabrielle, I'm going to say this real quick. When it came time for the United States to get military involved in Syria, there was a lot of pressure by the American public not to do it. And the United States eventually did back down. But Israel is a special case. Even now, the Democratic Party is about to lose their election because of Israel. They are literally
at the hip.
Exactly. And what's happening is that when it comes to the Israel issue, there's just something there. I don't know. Everyone can come up with different, conspiracy theories or realistic theories. But when it comes to Israel, the United States is like that moth that just heads for the flame.
There are interests, like there are big tech companies, there are big military companies, there are big banks. What's good about this war is that it's putting in stark relief that the big businesses, the military industrial complex, the tech companies, the oil companies, they're all on one side, and Israel is on that side. And the people who are fighting for climate change, the people who are fighting for equal pay or like living wage, all are on this Palestinian side, right? It's not that they all support Palestine, but people are making the connection that it's big interest, it's concentrated power that is on one side, and the fascists. Like it's very telling that now you need to be. Like it's the Zionist, right? Like, so it's not being, the laws are not for anti-Semitism, the laws are for anti-Zionism, right? We're more than happy with fascists that are anti-Semitic but Zionist than with Jews who are Holocaust survivors who are anti-Zionist, right? So like even a teacher got kicked out of his university who's Jewish, right? Because of their anti-Zionism action. So the fact that Harris and all the establishment Democrats are pro-Israel is not only AIPAC, it's AIPAC and the big businesses. It's just that they're all on the same, they have the same interest. And I see China and Russia also having similar interests. It's just now that it happens to be in the US, in 50 years' time, those big interests are going to be on the Chinese side of things. And that doesn't mean, so Israel, so
but even
the
in the
challenge
but
is-
even moderate views, even moderate views are not accepted. Like they treat moderates the same way they treat extremists. And this is the problem I have, is that the Democratic Party will not even bring the most moderate Palestinians to the stage, because anybody who even mentions Palestine, even if they're two-state supporters and pro-peace and moderate as hell, it's just, no, we don't want this view.
But you know why?
No, tell me, please.
Because it's so evident,
Yeah.
right? The moment you start having an argument, that side, the Harris and the pro-Israel side, is incapable of making a solid argument, right? That's why they avoid debates, and like they hate Mehdi Hassan and what have you. It's because it's so clear to many people, even right-wingers here in the US. Like I have students in GW, from Arkansas that are like pro-Trump, and they're saying, why the hell are we spending billions of dollars on Ukraine and Israel when we're unable to deal with a hurricane, right? So there is this a lot of epiphanies that are happening where people are starting to realize the connection between what's happening in the Middle East and other places in the world and the exploitation of resources, Congo, right? Sudan, the Emirates, right? The fact that the Emirates and like the fact that Israel is so excited about the Emirates and Saudi Arabia and thinking that these people represent the Arab world when like they have absolutely no representation, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. So it's like it doesn't like people see through that, like the Egyptians and the Jordanians. The fact that you had 2 attacks from the Jordanian side, that's unheard of. That is, for decades, you never had an attack from the Jordanian side, right? That's how bad the disconnect is between the Jordanian regime and the Jordanian people and the Egyptian regime and the Egyptian people, right?
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, the fact that Israel, which is actually something that Moshe Dayan said, that Israel is a foreign body that requires constant injections of antigens to be able to deal with its surrounding, to be able to survive in its surrounding. And the fact that Israeli leaders or Zionist leaders keep betting on the powerful at the expense of the masses is what is going to be the demise. Because when push comes to shove, you can only exploit people to a certain point. And these fissures are going to get more and more exposed.
Yeah,
Thank you.
slavery
So-
came to an end, didn't it?
We're gonna
Slavery came to an end.
we're gonna come to an end very soon. So Gabrielle,
sure,
you have the
sure.
last question.
Let's
Sorry to
listen
make
to
you wait
Gabrielle.
so long. And then Nizar will speak, and then I think we're gonna wrap things up. Go ahead, Gabrielle. Unmute, please.
Oh, I think I was thinking about something when you were still talking about the situation on the institutional situation of Israel and Palestine. Yes, in the because Nizar and Joseph made one point that I found interesting at that moment, and Nizar said that pointed out that basically Israel wants to. Yes, they would like to have peace, but then the condition is, yes, we want peace, but if the Jews can be master of their own destiny, and we can be safe, we can create, yes, 2 states, but if we are still safe and secure and in control, as if the other state didn't exist, which is impossible. It is not possible to make peace and have and be master as an ethnicity of your own destiny. Your destiny depends on the other, and it is not possible to build peace without having confidence in the other. It is not possible to build peace if you do not trust anyone except yourself. It is impossible. And on
Yeah,
the
but
other hand,
you and I agree on that. But there are a lot of people that disagree with that. They think that no, they can't. They do not need anybody else. That's the
yes,
problem. Is that there are people who
I talk for myself. I talk for myself, obviously.
Mhm.
On the other hand, Joseph pointed out that in fact, when the Israelis talk about peace, they seem to be afraid of peace itself more than of Palestinians. In fact, they would prefer to keep the conflict ongoing forever and manage it forever rather than make a step to make peace. Because this is, first of all, you are right on pointing out that in history, in human history, people make peace only when they don't have any alternative, basically. And when all the other alternatives are gone, just at that point, they decide to make the step of trusting the other and try to find an agreement. Otherwise, they don't take the step. And also the reason why the parties get more extremist is simply the consequence of the fact that they are desperate. When the people are desperate, they run out of rational solution, rational political lines. All they have at that point is the irrational choices. So what you have is that extremists take power when people are desperate. This is a universal law. It's a consequence, but it is also an indicator that we are at the end of the story because there is no end game. But Joseph pointed out that still the Israeli people are afraid of peace. And the reason why they are afraid of peace is because, in fact, I try to point out this point. Israel, in my opinion, just as the Palestinian Authority is a failed state, Israel is a failed state. This must be pointed out because it does not appear, it does not look like a state that is falling apart completely. And what keeps it all together is the conflict with the Palestinian. Once the conflict with the Palestinian, if it was solved, like with the magic wand, if they solved the war with the Palestinian, that would turn out in a civil war within Israel, probably, because Israel is a failed state, not because but also the Palestinian state is a failed state. And this is why I am skeptical about keeping the territorial confederation of Israel as it is with its territory and the Palestinian territories and make a federation between these entities. And the reason why I'm skeptical is because those are failed states. It is difficult to make a federation if you federate things which are dysfunctional. Israel is a dysfunctional, failed state because of its demographics and basically because of its demographics and because of its territorial configuration, not because of the governments are corrupt and extremist. It is from the ground. And this must be understood, in my opinion, within the picture.
You and I understand that, but the people in Palestine and Israel do not see it that way, right? So they would rather a dysfunctional government that has. So I know, for example, none of my cousins are interested in having Israeli neighbors, right? They do not want like the binational state is one where there are no, because they do not want to interact with the Israelis. They've seen such horrible, right? So they're very happy in the island of Ramallah, right? So the country can still be dysfunctional, but still be legitimate or desirable by the peoples. So especially after October 7th, there is no appetite to have to deal with the other side. The original point that you mentioned on the irrationality, yes, it's always been the argument that desperate times require desperate measures, right? So it's not like Israelis don't realize that the Palestinians are having a hard time. They say, yes, but there is no other way. It's either that or the Holocaust, right? So they believe in this false dichotomy, right? So long as they believe in that false dichotomy, that they're worried that if there is peace, they are letting their guard down, and every time they let their guard down, they got massacred, right? So there's going to need to be a cultural change. There's going to need to be
I don't disagree, but the main, I just point out also that the main point, one main point in this conflict is narratives. The narratives are a key factor because the two perception of histories, the two experiences of histories are completely different. Their moral universe are different. And this also creates radical distrust. And in fact, you're right, distrust is a main component, because even if you have a good plan and a good idea, but you have distrust, you're not going to go forward.
I beg to differ. So for example, in Northern Ireland, you're familiar with Northern Ireland, the situation in Northern Ireland? Yeah. So when Mitchell went there, he realized after talking to everybody and their cousin, because it's more than just two parties, right? It's not exactly dichotomous. It's not a binary between Catholics and Protestants. There is more factions. But what was common to all of them is that all the Northern Irish factions had a common fear, which is that a solution is going to be pushed down their throat, that something's going to happen in Northern Ireland without their consent. So he said, okay, let's start with this as a pillar, that we're not going to allow anything to happen in Northern Ireland. There is not going to be any agreement in Northern Ireland that does not get the consent of the Northern Irish.
Do you know why the solution, the peace in the Northern Ireland worked? Because of the European Union. It's because the European Union was the element of trust.
Okay, no. I would argue no, because they had two different conclusions. Of course, you had the moderates, but then you have the IRA and Temple, right, which were extreme. So the IRA accepted this Friday agreement because they wagered that with time, the Northern Irish are going to realize that joining Ireland is what they want in one generation, two generation. And at the same time, the Unionists believe that with time, the Northern Irish are going to realize that they're better off staying in the United Kingdom and not joining Ireland. So both the IRA and the Unionists believe that the agreement is going to do two very different things. So it is that ambiguity in the conclusion.
It is not very different as long as there is the European Union. It is the ambiguity is possible because of the European Union. But when when the United Kingdom voted for Brexit, this went into crisis because this. But anyway, this is we don't have to talk about everything in the world, I think, because the
but I'm just giving an example of two parties believing two very different things and yet agreeing on a process, right? Because they have the wrong idea that the future or this agreement is going to get them what they want. Both of them thought that the agreement is going to get them what they want, despite the fact that they want opposite things. That is still possible. That's what I'm arguing. Of course, it was enabled thanks to the EU offering the incentive. And now there's the danger because the EU is withdrawing those incentives because of Brexit. Yeah. But my point is how you can get people who believe opposite things that do not trust each other, but trust that the agreement is going to get them what they want.
All right. Thanks.
They went to
go ahead and
people in South Africa, and they learned from the experience of the South Africans, Nelson Mandela and de Klerk, how they came through and got their agreement. And they came back to Northern Ireland and they negotiated in the same way. They learned something from Mandela, I think, and de Klerk.
Yeah. But Mandela and de Klerk trusted each other, started trusting each other. Jerry Adams and Trimble still don't trust each other. Yeah. So trust is useful, but it's not necessary. You can still have an agreement. It's not sustainable, sure, but it arguably you can, if you sustain it enough for people to start having dividends in the process, just like in Lebanon, right? In Lebanon, they just got so fatigued with the civil war that they came up with this, Taif agreement, and they had so many pressures, so many crises. You'd think the civil war would start again, but it didn't, because they had the experience that resorting to civil war usually ends up with you losing anyways.
That's and that goes back to what I said earlier, that there are several factors like the peace of necessity for the economic reasons, for trade issues, for just general living and things like that, that it can be focused on before we get to the nitty-gritty. And I think that, Nizar, one thing that you did today, and Will, as you always do, is you bring a very organic, authentic Palestinian sentiment to this whole thing, because you mentioned your cousins and how they feel and what's important to them. And I think that a lot of Westerners don't really understand that. They're pro-Palestinian, but they think that Palestinians, maybe that this is what they're focused on. But you and I know that our families back home are more interested in just working, living, being able to travel and their homes and lands and stuff like that. On that note, we're almost at noontime, California. Nizar, thank you so much for today. I greatly appreciate it.
Sure.
I hope we always will keep in touch. يعطيك العافية. شكرا كثير لك. شرفتنا اليوم كثير.
Thank you,
And
Nizar.
I want to thank everybody else. And we'll see you guys in 2 more weeks.
Sure. Thank
And on
you.
that note,
Thank you, Nizar.
thank you,
Wonderful
Will.
guest.
Thank you for joining.
Yeah. See you all later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye for now.
Take care.